Good afternoon to everyone on the Eastern and Central Time Zone. Good morning to those on the West Coast. Thank you all so very much for joining us for our third installment of the Save HIV Funding training series for our Summer of Advocacy. Thank you all so very much for taking time out to be here with us today. This training is focused around traditional media engagement. Our next training in the series that will be July 31st will be focused around digital advocacy, but this training will be focused more on traditional media engagement. And we really welcome everyone to continue to introduce themselves in the chat. This webinar will be recorded and we'll have an opportunity if you miss anything or you want to share with others to make sure that you have access to that and as it will be connected on our website. Thank you so very much all for joining us. We also have two amazing panelists for you to hear from today, and I want to allow them to actually introduce themselves. And we'll start with Juliet, and then we'll allow Rick to also introduce themselves. These are folks who have done amazing advocacy, but also are writers, and one of them is a writer editor himself. And we would and using their expertise to actually let everyone know how to engage with the media even better and feel more comfortable doing it. And that is one of our major goals with that. And without further ado, I will pass it off to Juliet to introduce herself.
Thanks so much. Well, first of all, I'm really glad to be here. And this is such an important cause. I guess I will start by saying I'm a communications consultant. I have a 30-year career, but I've worked mostly in the last 15 years in global health and development with a focus on HIV/AIDS. And I'm now, over the past few years, gotten a little bit more involved in domestic HIV as well. Um, and I do all sorts of communications. I work with the Global AIDS Policy Partnership, so I've kind of slightly gotten engaged with the Federal AIDS Policy Partnership as well. And I do everything from, messaging, advocacy campaigns, and of course, earned media. Max, do you want me just to go through the slides now, or was this just introductions?
Just introductions.
Okay, then I
Rick?
will pass it over.
Thank you, Juliet. Well, I'm Rick Wasco from Chicago, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Positively Aware. This is actually my second stint at the magazine. In the mid-1990s, 95 through 97, I was art director of the magazine. I came back in 2010 as creative director of the magazine, and then about almost 3 years ago at this time, became editor-in-chief of Positively Aware. My personal story is that I've been living with HIV since at least 1992. I say at least because I had never gotten tested. And in 92, I developed Kaposi sarcoma. And that's how I found out that I was positive. And when I did get tested, I was simply handed 3 publications and told good luck. One of those publications was Positively Aware. They all came from the same organization. And so I realized 2 things. One, information was going to be the key to my survival. And number 2, I needed to get close to this organization that was producing this information. And that's how I ultimately became art director and then editor-in-chief of the magazine.
Thank you, Rick, for sharing that. Also, for also giving us more understanding of also who you are and why you also continue to do this work. And thank you both for taking the time out today to educate us all on the wonderful work that y'all have continued to do for years. One of the things I also do, and was saying this a little bit before we officially started, was we did also see that yesterday that the Senate did pass a piece of the rescissions package. And it is now going back to the House. I do encourage everyone that is on this call, after this call is over, after you have had an understanding and a better understanding of this traditional media engagement, is to call your legislator, especially your House of Representatives, call them today, and letting them know that this continued rescissions package, even though they are not taking as much money as they were originally to take from PEPFAR that we do not want any more cuts to international HIV funding, but we also don't want to see the cuts to NPR and PBS as well. And one of the reasons I am also excited to have this is because one of the reasons that we are doing this traditional media engagement piece is we have heard from folks that engaging the legislators has been difficult. How do we continue to also make sure the legislators are accountable for what they have done? And one of the ways in which we do that is through engaging our local media to make sure that they understand how in which these cuts, be it the Medicaid cuts that were passed in the Big Ugly Bill, or the cuts around international HIV funding, or just the way in which people are very afraid and not knowing what and how in which their services will be changed or not further going. All of that scares people. And what we have to do is educate and make sure that our media, where a lot of folks are reading and folks still read the local newspaper, people are still watching local TV, and including especially people in my family. So I know that it is important for us to engage our local media to make sure that the policymakers are held accountable to this because their constituents read these papers. Their constituents are watching the local news. They and having stories about how in which people are directly impacted by these cuts, be it to Medicaid, SNAP, PEPFAR, or others, and understanding the different ways in which people are impacted. This is important for us to be able to continue to share that message, and it brings more of our constituents to come join us. But it also, especially if it's done in certain media outlets that legislators typically read, it also directly reaches out to the legislators to know that these votes were incorrect. With that, I am going to allow the people that are more seasoned and better at this type of engagement with the media to kick us off. And I will allow Juliet to kick us off with a set of slides that I believe everyone should see or have access to be able to see now. And Juliet, just let me know when you would like for me to move to the next slide.
Sure. Well, you can definitely move to the next slide. Um, yeah. So, as Max said, earned media still matters. I mean, I know there's a lot of, trust issues with traditional media, but at the local level in particular, I think it is still very much a trusted source of information, and especially for, as Max mentioned, especially for policymakers. It does a lot of things, and one of which is it does help you to control the narrative and to keep your issues at, it's a crazy news cycle. I've seen some crazy news cycles in my time and nothing like what it is right now. It's constant whirlwind, but this, it is a proactive way to keep your issue at the top of the news cycle and to control the narrative. And I think you all, as grassroots advocates, are actually, your perspective is so important and so unique, and probably much more likely to break through because it is authentic. It's You are able to build a very real sense of urgency by telling the stories that are happening on the ground, in your states and your districts, and it's very personal. It's your issue, and you're coming at it from a very personal perspective, and so that's why you're the perfect champions for earned media. You can go to the next slide, Max. So there's a lot of different ways, and I'll go through a couple of different tactics. One, I'm sure you all have read or know about letters to the editor. Um, so again, this is where your personal point of view is so important because you're going to be talking about it from your perspective, but it does entail a little bit of homework and a little bit of sort of ongoing effort. Not a ton, but I definitely suggest, if you don't already, I'm sure you probably do, having some sort of news alerts, Google alerts, whatever the case may be, but monitoring your local media coverage. And you can also do this obviously online, to see what's in sort of the zeitgeist in your community. Because this requires responding to something that was already printed. And so if you read something, and even if it's only a tangential link, if you can kind of draw your point back to it in some way, shape, or form, do it. And because we want to keep it in the top of mind for folks, again, even if it's a little bit of a leap to link, you can try it. And so, whatever the topic is, whatever that particular article is, sending in a letter to the editor quickly. So usually, I would ideally say within 24 hours, but 48 is probably, you could. There's still some chance, outside chance, but you want to be able to respond to it quickly. These are very short, and you'd think that would be easier, but it's actually kind of hard to keep your response to 200 to 400 words because we are all very passionate and have a lot to say and a lot of data we want to include. This has to be very top line, your key message, and why it's coming from you, what your connection to the issue is, who you are, if it might be relevant to bring your organization into it, especially, for example, if you're a frontline healthcare worker or you work directly with people who are impacted, or if you yourself are impacted by HIV, it's important to make that connection. And then I'll show you in a minute a screenshot of this, but if you to submit it, there's almost always instructions for how to submit. If with your daily newspaper or community newspaper, you just have to go to their website, and you can almost always find how they want you to submit it. Sometimes it's directly online. Sometimes there's a letters editor, but they'll always have those instructions on their websites. Max, you can go to the next slide. So the other tool is one of the other tools is an op-ed, and these are lengthier pieces where you can kind of build more of a narrative or a story. It can be, I mean, you want to have a news hook. So there has to be a reason. I mean, again, the news cycle is crazy. So why would they accept this op-ed versus however many they receive or submissions they receive? So you want to tie it to something. So it's especially good if there's a new policy proposal. For example, rescissions, if there is an impact. I know those are the rescissions right now, they're more focused on global funding, but if there's a way to tie it back to something that's happening in your state or district, or even just it is a way to tie it back to a current story in the news. I have no doubt we'll have lots of stories in the news that we can hook to. Policy, funding, an anniversary, a day of recognition. These are all ways that offer a news hook. So again, you want to start with why the issue is timely right up at the top, and why you're the right person to be speaking about it. Again, that's your connection, your lived experience, and anchoring it in your values. Sometimes it is helpful to co-author it with a policymaker. Now, that can be a little bit trickier if you don't know them or what have you. But if you have policymakers who are sort of already champions of the issue, again, those aren't maybe the ones we're targeting, but it can help you to get it placed. Getting it placed gives you a way to persuade or put pressure on the opposite side. So that's just one way, but you don't have to have anyone co-authoring it from a policy side. It can also be great to kind of band together, two champions or advocates together might have more of an opportunity to get placed than one, but one can get placed too. There's just lots of options. And then again, these are a bit longer form than a letter to the editor. They're usually around 700 words. They could be up to 1,000. You just want to check. Most of them are not over 1,000, but I think sort of between 700 and 1,000 words is kind of your sweet spot. Not all papers accept them though, so you just need to check and see if your top daily or community papers do. Again, that will all be information that's on the websites. Max, you can go to the next slide. Max, I'm not sure if you heard me. You can go to the next slide. Oh, there we go. Okay. So here's just an example. This is just a screenshot. So this is an example of what you're going to be looking for. Washington Post happens to be my top daily. So that you can see what it would look like on their website. Also for a letter to the editor as well as for op-ed. In this case, they also give you great guidelines for each paper is kind of different in terms of what they want in an op-ed. There's a lot of consistency, but there's, you just want to take a look at it and make sure you're responding to what they're asking for. And then again, some will have just an email that you'll send a message to, others will have a form that you'll need to fill in. So you just need to take a look. And honestly, if you just look on the website, it's usually under contact us. Um, so it's not too hard to find. It just takes a little bit of research. And once you do it, you have that information. You can keep doing it. So we can go to the next slide. So and then just building relationships with the media over time. Um, I would say the thing reporters and Rick, you can check me on this, but in my experience, the thing reporters hate the most is when you try to pitch them, but you've never read a thing they've written. They're not fond of that. So rightfully so. So just, again, kind of just make it a habit. I know everyone's busy, but make it a habit just to kind of in the morning see what your local paper's covering. You're going to find that the same reporters cover the same issues. So you're going to identify a handful, probably not even a handful, probably two at best, local reporters that are going to be your go-tos. And then once you know who they are, just read their stuff on a regular basis so that you know what their tone is, what they're covering, what they're interested in. If you can, follow them on social media. Um, and there's probably not going to be an HIV specific person, but someone who covers health, public health, and intersectional issues, so equity, criminal justice, housing. But again, it's probably just going to be a handful of reporters. And once you find them, so there's a little bit of upfront research, but once you find them, it's gonna become sort of a muscle. You just keep working and you'll kind of know what they're up to. I would suggest introducing yourself when you're not pitching. So when you're not asking them to do something, let them know who you are, what kind of resources you can provide for them, how you can help them build their stories. Just let them know. Again, you're not asking for anything in return, but you just want them to know that, hey, we know these are timely issues and I'm going to be a resource for you. And then once you've done all those things, if you read a story you like, or you read one you don't agree with, that's your time to reach out, thank them for covering the topic and their continued attention to it, but then offer your perspective and say, hey, I'd love to talk to you about this. I have some data for you, whatever the case may be. That's your time to reach out when they've written something that you want to comment on. And Max, we can go to the next slide. So just again, I don't mean to keep harping on sort of homework because it won't take you long. I promise this isn't, a ton of work, but have some things at the ready at all times. So like, your bio, which today I will say I did not have it ready. I don't know why, and I didn't do a great job describing myself. So that happens. So how, know what your bio is, like what are the things you want them to know, and a 1 to 2 sentence description of your organization or campaign or cause that you want to connect to. Um, I would just say know your key messages. What is the one message you want to make sure this reporter does not get off the phone, the Zoom, whatever the case may be? You want them to leave with that one message. There might be 3 messages you want to get across, but if there's one you want them to not forget, make sure that's top of mind. I know the Save HIV Funding campaign has key messages. Have those like on a piece of paper next to you, and before you get off the phone, like just check that you've hit them all because that's your talking points. That's your sort of like Bible for what you want to say in all of these conversations. You want to keep coming back to those messages. And data is so important. So to the extent that you have stats at the ready that are local, or relevant to that particular state, district, whatever the case may be, that's really important. And I would also say personal stories. So whether it's your own lived experience or things you've witnessed through your job, and your work, that is what's so rich. The combination of data and personal stories are really what's going to sell the media. And also be prepared to offer them other things. So if there are other people, other folks on this call, perhaps, or clinicians or whatever the case may be, who else could they talk to? So sometimes it might mean you talk to a reporter and you give them all this information and then they don't use your quote in the story. That's okay because they're going to come back to you and you're playing a long game. Of course, ideally we want to be covered, but if you're not, it doesn't mean it was a loss. Next, we can go to the next slide. And then there's a couple of different types of interviews, and I think this is really important for the type of work you all do. So on the record, of course, you're familiar with it. You're going to be quoted. Your name's going to be in the story, possibly your place of work. You can also offer up information. Just make this very clear to the reporter that I am talking to you on background. And when you do that, they're not going to use your name. They may use the actual quote that you say, but they're going to say a source close to the issue or an expert in this field or whatever. They're not going to use your name. They're not going to use your organization to keep you protected. If you want to be off the record and you don't want anything you're saying to be used in the story, you need to make that clear up front. And the reporter will either say yes or no. They may not want to talk to someone off the record. They may not want to talk to someone on background. They may really want to have a quote that they can source. But you just need to make those rules clear up front and get agreement from the reporter because the last thing you want to do is be saying something to someone and then think, oh, by the way, what I just said was off the record. That's not as likely to work, and you could get yourself into trouble. So those are some tips there. Next, we can go to the next slide. These are just some quick. I won't go over this too much. I'm probably kind of going over time now, but there are just some easy ways to make sure you have control over the conversation. I would say the most important thing is just don't worry. Treat it like a conversation. If you set the rules up front that this is off the record, on background, or I'm okay being quoted. Once you do that, you're fine. But just some ways to control the narrative is, answering the question. You can take some time. You don't have to rush into an answer. You can take a beat, make sure you have your thoughts together, especially in these aren't going, for the most part, be live interviews. If they are, even if they are live interviews, you can take a beat and stick to your messages. That's why you want to kind of have them in your cheat sheet, know them off the top of your head. That way you always have something to come back to. Bridging and blocking is once you tell your story, if they ask a question you really would prefer not to answer, you can say something like, well, that's an interesting question, but what I really want to say is, and once you know these tools, you will start seeing them in people in interviews all the time. So don't feel like you have to answer something that is uncomfortable for you, or even if you say, well, I don't really know the answer to that, but I can, find you someone who would know the answer. That's totally fine. You're not meant to know everything. You're meant to be speaking from your perspective and your experience. And then control is just emphasizing the pieces that you really want them to notice. So kind of amplifying a point, like when you get to your key message saying, and this is really what I want you to know, or this is really important, or just sort of really kind of calling out and bolding that particular statement is a way to control the conversation. Next, we can go to the next slide. And there you have it. Earned media in 10 minutes. Hopefully that was helpful.
I learned something from that.
Yes, yes, I definitely did as well. Um, Thank you so very much for that, Juliet. And one of the natural like follow-up questions that I have, and also Rick would love to hear this from you as well, is what have been some of the things that you have seen that make an op-ed or a letter to the editor stand out?
I absolutely think it's personal connection to the issue. So that's number one. And so that you guys already have that. That's, easy. And then, as I said, I think the combination of data and human interest stories, tying those two things together. Again, that's really hard in a letter to the editor because you don't have a lot of space. But that's why op-eds are really excellent tools for that. I know you're going to talk about digital media on another call, but I would say because spaces are closing for op-eds, we don't have as much user-generated content in traditional media as we used to. I mean, it used to be anyone could get a blogger account on the Huffington Post. You can't do that anymore. I think a lot, there used to just be more media, point blank. There's not as much anymore. But so if you write an op-ed, and you've got that data and those personal stories and it doesn't get placed because that's what happens most times, you're not going to get it placed, you have to keep trying. Don't forget LinkedIn is a really good option. A lot of people are moving more to LinkedIn and using it as a platform, and you do get additional eyes on it. So I would just use that as a backup. But in any case, data combined with stories are going to be your best path to getting published.
Thank you so very much, Juliet. Rick would love to hear from you. And I know because Rick also supports us on our counter narrative communications calls as well, has given us some really good pointers also in thinking about how in which we connect the personal and the story. So would love to hear more from you about that, Rick.
Sure. Thank you, Max. Yeah, with regard to that, it's about being strategic. You know, Positively Aware is still a news and information outlet. And so we can't overtly advocate. So Positively Aware can't be the one to say, call your senators now and your congressmen and let them know, to vote no on this. But what we can say is that advocates are organizing and launching this campaign, and they have this message. And here's how you can get involved in that campaign. So um, it's a matter of how you present your message. I have some thoughts here about that. With regard to a letter to the editor, for example, like Juliet said, it's about making it personal and telling your story. But I think what you also have to consider is why would they be interested in your story? So you have to do a couple things. You have to translate your story into terms that they will understand and appreciate. Also, you have to explain why it does matter to them. Well, don't explain explicitly, but make it relatable. You know, they have a grandmother too, or they were once unemployed, or they were in a similar situation. Um, there's a You want to avoid talking points. You want to avoid um, making your message strictly about statistics. Max, I'm going to use that same quote from Stalin that you that I've used before. Um, Joseph Stalin, to quote a Russian dictator, which somehow seems appropriate in these times, one death is a tragedy. 1 million deaths are a statistic. So it's not news when you're putting it out there, or it is news that you're putting it out there that 17 million people are going to lose their health care by the year 2034. But it's a cold number. You've got to instead focus on the micro. How does this affect you, somebody somebody that your reader, your target audience is going to understand and connect with? They have, like I said, they have a grandmother too. Does grandma stand to lose her Medicare? And that's what you've got to get them to think about is thinking about your story from their perspective. Again, why it matters to them. Um, Juliet was also talking about, maybe cultivating people in the media. Um, I would suggest think, excuse me, think about the kind of relationship you want to have with somebody in the media. How do you want to be seen as? Are you an advocate or are you a resource? If you're an advocate, you're always going to be saying, well, there's not enough money being spent on AIDS. And oh, we're this close uh, to beating AIDS and fighting back HIV. Or are you going to be the person that is the go-to person for that writer, for that reporter, who can give not only numbers, facts, but also context, what the meaning is behind a number. Um, an interesting thing. Right now we're talking about how $400 million is going to be restored to PEPFAR. And in fact, this morning I got pitched a story by one of our regular contributing writers. Tim wants to do a story not on the $400 million. He wants to do a story about what happens next year. because it turns out that first off, $400 million is not enough for PEPFAR, not even for this year. Next year, they're looking at cutbacks potentially in the billions of dollars. So, you know, is it the immediate story that you want to comment on? Oh, it's great. We're happy that the cutbacks, that this money is going to be restored. Or do you want to be the person who gives the context and says, but behind that figure, behind the headline, there's this to consider. So, um, are you going to offer a viewpoint or are you going to offer insight? I think that would be the way to sum it up. Um, about the bio, that's an excellent idea that Juliet suggested. And um, I would recommend for Brett to keep that brief. Um, keep it as short as possible. I know people want to give their complete bio, all the titles and awards that they've earned, but when you're writing a bio, look at it more from the perspective of what about your background gives you standing to talk about what you're talking about today in this letter to the editor, in this commentary, in the stuff that you're being interviewed about. What is it that makes you the expert on this subject? That's what your bio should be focused on. Um, what other notes do I have here? Um, that's pretty much it. But what I would say, the main thing is always be thinking about why it should matter to them. Um, otherwise, you're simply in telling your story, you're telling people why it matters to you. What you're trying to do is convince other people why it's important to them, to their constituents, to other people who, quite honestly, might be more like them as opposed to you.
I love that, Rick. Thank you so very much for that. One question that came out of what you were saying that I think is important, and I did see some people's hands. We will get to audience questions soon. But one question was around the time, as as an editor yourself, the timing of a piece, such as do we talk about the saving of some of the money in PEPFAR versus this deeper, this is what could happen, and this is like pulling back some more of the pulling back more of understanding and understanding like what's actually going on behind what when as an editor, what are you thinking about the timing of these stories versus like especially with how everything is going in DC constantly.
Yeah.
What is your thought around like the timing of when these stories should go out?
Um, you should be thinking about what what the frequency, what the interval is of that outlet. Positively Aware comes out 6 times a year. Um, but we've been doing obviously much more timely stories on our website. Um, those are stories that you're going to read online that obviously are not going to be, in the print edition 2 months from now. So be mindful of what their time frame is. Um, you know, Tim has been pitching me a number of ideas, and I've had to explain to Tim that because of the frequency and our resources, you know, I can only post so many stories in a week online because I need to sleep and do other work. Um, but what I've told Tim, in all seriousness, is that Positively Aware can't write the breaking news story that the house is on fire, but what we can do is the next day story that's the aftermath. What now that the house is burned down? And so sometimes the interview is that, oh my gosh, the house is on fire. And then other times the interview has to be about, well, this is what it means to my family, to the community that the house burned down. So you always have to pitch your story from the angle, from the perspective of who you're telling it to, whether it's to the outlet or to their intended audience. And that's another thing is that sometimes your intended audience is not necessarily the same as the audience that that outlet has. So be thinking about that.
With that, and another added piece, is it important as we are also thinking about the targeting different legislators and trying to get to local media in their in their area, is it important to also understand and how do you go about understanding who the audience of certain outlets are?
Um, do a little research. Um, Obviously, if it's an outlet that is more general, you're going to reach people who not only are not like you, but who probably see you as alien as you see them. And that's something, thank you for bringing that up, Max, because I did want to talk with everybody about is, you know, on this side, we always talk about the value and importance of empathy. You know, you know, we we feel for these people. We want to meet people where they're at. Well, sometimes we practice empathy only with the people that we feel a connection with or we feel that we can relate to. Sometimes the hard part of empathy is trying to relate to or how to fashion your message and appeal to people who are nothing like you. You know, to the family member who voted for the orange guy. For you do have to think about how do you approach a subject? How do you frame a subject from the perspective of somebody who says, well, they're all illegals. They broke the rules. That makes them criminals. And I can say this from the perspective of my family. Um, you know, my sister called them illegals until she realized that some of the people um, that she goes to, that she relies on, um, she can't find them anymore because they are either afraid or they've been deported, or just as bad, they have self-deported. And um, in fact, last week I even posted about this. Was while I was in California visiting my family, I told her, you know, about these illegals, and she said, "Oh, well, they're only going after the criminals." And I told her, "Well, you know, th they broke the rules, so that makes them criminals too." Before I could even finish saying that, she said, "That's stupid. Shut up." Sometimes you throw people's words back. No, I take that back. I was going to say you throw people's words back at them, but that only riles them up. What you want to do sometimes is get people to make themselves question their own thinking. Critical thinking is so important. And, you know, you getting emotional, you lashing out, you vilifying the other side, that's not a way to win an argument, let alone convince people. Um, think about instead uh, how how to maybe get people to start questioning things. You're not going to convert anybody in one letter to the editor in one commentary necessarily, but think about how you can get them to start thinking.
Thank you so very much for that, Rick. And one, just bringing that up, also the intersectionalness and understanding how in which the multiple attacks on multiple communities, especially immigrant communities, is also impacting our ability to be a healthier society. But I also think it is very important that we make both our legislators and their constituents question their votes.
Yeah.
Make and that is one of the and holding them accountable. And one of the reasons that we're talking through the op-eds and the letters to the editor is to make these both constituents, as we've heard more and more folks that did vote a certain way last year are having remorse on some of those votes. We will continue to, and what we're doing by speaking out more. telling more of our stories. We're having more and more people rethink and use that critical thinking skills that I think we were not using as much as we needed to last year, in order to make sure that folks are doing that, and rethink about how in which they move forward as this long game, as we hold our legislators accountable through the summer of advocacy and going into the fall into next year. Now, I do want to open it up to folks that are on the call to ask questions. You can drop questions in the chat if you would like. You can also use the raise hand feature, and I will click on you to be able to ask said questions. Again, we are asking questions here, people, not statements. But again, with these experts here, I would love for y'all to take a chance. If you have questions around engaging your local media, please ask them now. And again, feel free to put them in the chat or use the raise hand feature and we can get you off mute. Steven, hey, go ahead.
Yes, keep laughing, Rick. Hey, just some advice here. Having done a few interviews sometimes on TV, these are mainly the ones in television that I'm thinking of that happen sometimes. You'll get a call from someone will give your name to a reporter for who's willing to share the HIV experience on, on TV and everything and ask some questions. I do some research and get a little ahead, prepared a bit before I do those. But when I do that, sometimes it's been these last 25 years or so, at least a couple of times when I've done that, when you're sitting there filming for maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and it's only going to be like maybe a minute to 3 minutes on air. And so I'm never sure, really. It usually works out fine, but sometimes when it airs, the clip that they use is something that really demands a lot more explanation. They just have it as a quote, and it just hangs there sometimes. And I keep on thinking, I really wish they would have used this other piece, or at least added this piece to what I'd said in that quote, something like that. So how do you respond when that happens on air? On air live, I can just fix it right then and there. But if it's something that's being broadcast, like at the 5 o'clock news or something like that in the evening, how do you address that? What when that happens?
Well, I see that Julia answered, I think, in the chat to that. I have some personal experience that I would like to share with that, but Julia, go ahead and
No, I was gonna say I answered a different question, so
oh,
feel free. Go for it.
all right. Stephen, first off, ha. And then um, but in addition to what I do, with regard to HIV, I'm also co-director here in Chicago for an LGBTQ plus Catholics group. It's actually part of the Archdiocese of Chicago. And so in our capacity as co-directors, my colleague and I, have been interviewed by local media, for first about you know, Pope Francis, then about his death, and then about Pope Leo. And I have had different experiences with local TV stations and with a couple of the newspapers here. And in while I'm doing the interview, I know right away that I've said something that's become a soundbite, and that sometimes becomes the only thing that gets used. And you're like, oh, but I had all these other great points. Um, one not so good experience, a reporter, um, she kept wanting me to answer the same question, and she put it to me in different ways. Um, she really didn't want, she had more of an agenda. So it wasn't really an interview about, how one gay Catholic man feels about this topic. It was about, well, how do I feel about this one particular priest? So, and I wouldn't answer the question because I was not going to give her the satisfaction of feeding into her uh, bias and the way she was planning to do her story. Um, Now, on the positive side, I've actually developed good relationships with some of the local reporters here because separate from the interview, again, this is about becoming a source for somebody. Um, you know, you tell them, well, look, here, on background, there's this. Let me give you some more context behind that. And so this way, when they get assigned a similar story, they come to you, they're a little more, not exactly sympathetic to you, but they're willing to hear you out more. So get past the one experience and try to develop a relationship with them. Eh, Candor is the key.
And one thing I would just add to that is with earned media, I mean, there's always a risk, right? Because you can't control the editing, you can't control the broader story. That's why earned media is all about effort, whereas paid media, which who among us has money to buy it, we absolutely control the narrative. So the cost in earned media is the effort and the risk you're taking. So there is always a risk. But that's why I would say no one tactic in and of itself is enough. Earned media is really important, but you have to be doing a number of other things. This is where a LinkedIn blog could help tell the story more, where you can control the narrative. It's why we pitch multiple outlets. It's why you do social media. It's why you're having one-on-one conversations. So, sometimes the media is going to get it wrong or they're going to edit you in a way that isn't ideal. So it's absolutely worth taking the risk as long as you're, doing your homework. But it also requires that we have to do all the things, unfortunately, which is a lot of effort, as we know. One other thing I did just want to say, Max, if it's okay, and this is going back a little bit, is I know it sounds daunting, right? We're talking about all this work you have to do, and you have to, be willing, you have to try to persuade unlikely folks and audiences who may not be open to your message, and you have to know the reporters and all. What I would say is it's the numbers and it's the doing it and I don't want this to be so intimidating to you that you just say, okay, well, I'm not going to do it, it's too much. Because again, once you start just like even making it a habit to read your local papers and to know which reporters, even if you're just doing that background research and knowing how to submit an op-ed, even if you don't do it immediately, just kind of getting yourself familiar with it will be helpful. And the volume, if we're all doing something, that's going to make a difference. So I guess I just don't want perfect to be the enemy of the good here and just take that risk and just try to do it. And we are not intending for this to be intimidating for you, quite the opposite.
Right. I just put it in the chat that I did not mean to try to scare anyone like that. It's in the 20 years or so, it's only happened a couple of times. And it's happened so quickly and then it's gone and you need a news cycle. People forget the next week anyway. It's just want to I want to see get some pointers on how do you deal with that when that happens. So thank y'all so much. That does help a lot.
Yeah. Well, and Stephen, understand too that the reporter is trying to acquire information. They're not the expert. So um, they could benefit from your help if you can direct them to other sources or do a little of your own homework before the interview or before you write the letter so that you can provide little nuggets of information. Again, not talking points, not abstract statistics, but little information that can help flesh out a bigger picture. Um, and again, that will also help endear you to that outlet or to that reporter.
You're absolutely right on both those points. That when I say a couple of times, the first time was someone with whom I ended up developing a great relationship. We had a great working relationship, when he did for the papers. And this last time it just happened was a new reporter too, just out of his internship too. So someone I barely knew. So when you mentioned those kind of, they put those things in context, thinking, oh, that's right. That in both times there were folks I had just met and everything else. The one that I worked with originally, was great. We had this great relationship, and you're exactly right on both points. It's about developing those relationships. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you for answering that. And Juliet, if you don't mind answering for the recording purposes, Julie's question, do you think that the small town newspapers will have a paywall that prevents letters or other submissions from non-subscribers?
Yeah, so it's definitely possible. I wouldn't say for non, if you're able to read the original article, more than likely you're going to be able to submit a letter to the editor. So it's if the letter, I mean, if the original article is behind a paywall, maybe all of their content is behind a paywall, but you wouldn't have read it because it's behind a paywall. So likely, if one thing is public, everything's going to be public. But what I would say is that if you plan to be pitching your local daily. And in fact, even if you're not planning on pitching your local daily, I think it's worth subscribing if you can. I know, we can't subscribe to everything, but if you can, it is worth subscribing to your local daily because you want to see what the conversation is. It makes you a better advocate in your state. So I would highly recommend that you do that in any case. But again, if you can or you for whatever reason you're reading content that's behind a paywall and you don't want to subscribe, it's likely that the letter would be as well. But if one thing is public, most likely everything else will be too.
Thank you all so very much for everything that you have said throughout this training. I do want to allow if there's any more questions or hands raising, but if there's not, I do want to let everyone and remind everyone that we are having a digital advocacy training, the next one on the 31st, and then on the 7th, we will be having our direct action training. Both of them are on Thursdays. Both of them will be at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So please make sure that you also register for those. We will be sending out links to both this training along with our previous trainings, both on the teach-ins and legislator engagement that were both done in June in the future, and they will have access to those links on the website. And with that, I will ask this question out loud. Is it better to become independent as an agency to share relevant info in the form of editorials or letters to community if there are so many hurdles to getting through to traditional media outlets?
I'm not sure I entirely understand the question. Is it better to become independent as an agency? I don't know, Rick, I don't know if that is clear to you.
No, that's why I'm glad you said it was unclear to you, Juliet, because I'm not. Is it maybe that, Albie, do you think that a letter might be more likely to be published? Oh, make your own news outlet, develop your own newsletter. Well, if you have the resources to, yeah, sure, go ahead. But not everybody can do that. Not everyone has the time. Um, maybe you
And I
could.
would, sorry, I didn't mean to step on what you're going to say, Rick. I was just going to say, I mean, yes, sure. I mean, I think it's really important to get your viewpoint out there. There are many platforms to do that on, right? Like there's social media, there's everything else. And it is very, you could create something, but just because you create something, how do you draw an audience to it? So there is a lot of benefit to these platforms already have an audience. And again, I don't want to make it sound as though it is too daunting or not worth trying to reach out to the media. I think the whole point of this is really reach out to the media 100%. It's just, you never know if you're going to get a article placed or not. Like that's my whole 30-year career. So there's going to be a lot of times you don't, but it's still worth it. And by the way, there's a lot of community newsletters that exist already. I was going to say, look at some Substacks. Substack is huge right now. And a lot of those already do have ready-made platforms. You might be able to talk to someone who's got a great Substack that wants your point of view. Look at them just like you would look at traditional media and pitch your story to them. If there's newsletters you already read, um, go talk to them, reach out to them. They're always looking for experts. So those are other things. If you want to create a newsletter, I would never stop you from doing that, but it is a lot of effort and you are starting from zero in terms of the audience you have. So it's going to be slow going. So that too would be a very long game.
And for my part, what I would say is make it compelling, but make it compelling to them. Answer that question, why should it matter to them? And if you can do that in a compelling manner, um, you are much more likely to get published, more likely to be read wherever it appears.
But again, I know you're going to be talking about this at the end of the month, or I guess in August. Get on social media. I mean, I'm sure you're all there, but to get your viewpoint out there and go around any kind of third party, be posting all the time on social media and responding to current events and tagging relevant people.
Thank you so very much. Thank you both for taking time out and dealing with some of my last minute asks to be able to be a part of this training. Thank you all for joining us. Again, we will send this out. Again, join us for to learn more about Substacks, some of the also new social media places and engagement tools, podcasts, and others that we will be talking about on our next part of the training series on the 31st of July. Again, yeah, we will talk about Substack on the next one. But thank y'all so very much. Thank y'all again. We will end on time today. Thank y'all so very much. And make sure you call your legislators to push back against the rescissions package and call in the House. So thank y'all again so very much and have a good rest of your day.